If you pick up a power tool and you're like, man, this is amazing. I love Bosch. That's the feeling that I work to create for people.
It's got to meet the user standards. It's got to meet what they expect this tool to do out in the field. If I learned from it, it wasn't a failure.
Welcome to Beyond Bosch. I'm your host, Jessica Dahl, and today I am very excited to talk about this topic of user experience. And we have two guests on with us today, Mike Cholas and Sara Steinhurst. So Mike is the trade expert for the Power Tools product development team. He's a graduate of the University of Denver, where he majored in marketing with a focus on international business and international studies. And Sara Steinhurst is a user experience designer from the Central Management Consulting Group in Bosch, North America. Sara graduated with a Master of Science in Human-Computer Interaction and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I am so excited to talk to both of you. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. So obviously, we've got someone from Power Tools. We have someone from user experience. Why have we made this connection? I know that Power Tools is on the forefront of using UX in their product development and all of that. But before we kind of dive in, I would love for each of you just give me a little bit more background of who you are, what you actually do, so we can have some context to the conversation. Sara, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So my whole role is really making desirable products for people. So the three pillars of innovation, we have desirability, feasibility, and viability. We really focus on that desirability piece. Do people want our products? Are they delighted when they use them? And can they use them? And so that's my job, is to really make someone's day better and make products that are awesome and help people have better lives, or, just have a better day. If you pick up a power tool and you're like, man, this is amazing. I love Bosch. That's the feeling that I work to create for people when they use our products.
Oh, I love that. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, so my role within the product development team is to actually work with Sara and also work with our end users out in the field and be the voice of our users back to the organization. Whether that's in the engineering phases or the design phases, it's taking their input, taking what they're looking for and understanding what their job is in application and making their lives better, making the tool better and something that's relevant to them.
So why are we talking today about user experience? I think you hear this term, but how do we define that here? Sara, you kind of alluded to that feeling, right? You get with a product. How do you define user experience, and why is it so important and critical for business?
User experience is, think about all of the things that you use that you love, right? And making sure that we understand who our users are, that we can empathize with them. If there's one word you can relate with user experience design, it's empathy. It's having empathy for the people that we're talking to the people buying our products, to the people using those products, and really getting out in the field and actually watching them use them and see, because Mike and I actually had a conversation the other day. We sit in an office all day, right? We're the ones designing these products, and we need to go out there and talk to the people who actually use them every day, because something we think, we might make some assumptions, but then we learn, hey, that's not really actually what's going on, or maybe that's not the highest priority problem. Maybe there's something else that we need to address. When someone's holding a drill for several hours at a time, making sure that we're addressing the right problems. And that's where we use a process called user-centered design. And the first step of that process is actually solving the right problem, defining the right problem. And the second step of that process is making sure that we solve that problem correctly. So understanding and then solving. And that understanding piece is so critical. And that's where empathy comes in, and making sure that we're designing the right things.
Absolutely. And so, Mike, you kind of mentioned a bit of your career was spent, if I understand this correctly, actually on construction sites or with customers themselves.
I spent a little over 2.5 years in different roles accountable to various parts of either customers or the sales organization. So when I first started my career at Bosch after the rotational program, I was in a management rotational program that we had. I went directly into our sales organization where I was managing our distribution. So the channels of distribution, typically on the pro side of the business, which would be, if you think of a large construction company, where those materials, where those tools, where those companies are buying that stuff from. After that, I actually moved into the direct sales portion of it, where I wasn't working with the distributors. I was working directly with the end user. So that got me into the job sites all over, various job sites in Chicago and actually around the country. It was pretty awesome. I used to be scared of heights until the very first time one of the safety superintendents was like, "You want to go to the 65th floor? It's the roof of the building." And I said no at first. And I was like, how many people are going to get up there? And after that, I started actively asking every job site I was on, can I get as high as possible on this site to capture the view? But aside from that, being able to get onto the job sites and see users actually putting our tools to work, and then actually going back to the offices, the company's offices, and seeing what does the back end of it look like? Because there's a full ecosystem of the job site, but also of the power tool journey and how it goes from the company's warehouse or yard to the site and back. And even understanding that and how that whole journey comes into play is something that we can look at and we can improve upon to give a better experience to any of our users.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you had a story or an example that you could share of something that played out from that, like a success from that you kind of witnessed this maybe gap or way you can improve and you were able to implement that and the customer was excited? And
yeah, so I did a fairly long research project that lasted about 7 months, where we were trying to add value to one of our programs that deals directly with end users. And throughout this entire process, it was actually a very open-ended, let's get the research, let's figure out what our users want out of this program, what their ideal situations would be, and go out, start interviewing, and start figuring out where our users are telling us that we should have improvements. So really open-ended concept, but we knew the end goal was this has to be a user-focused outcome, right? We have to have user-driven solutions that are going to provide value back to their overarching business. Mm-hmm. And what came of this 6-month-long full nationwide research was that our end users were looking for ways to actually service their tools in a better way. So we had a program already set up to get service of their tools from their yard or from their job site to our service centers, but it was a really manual process. And no one really outright came and said that we need this to not be so manual. It was finding out what their pain points were and listening to their pain points that we figured out we could integrate a mobile solution that they could just notify us they had pickups and what those pickups were, so that we could get faster on the front end of taking their tools, but also on the back end of servicing their tools, getting them back into the field faster, so minimizing their downtime as well. I would say that would be one of the main fully implemented and in-market research studies that have come into play so far. But there are so many that are ongoing. Being able to say what the full outcome is, it's still to be determined.
So I would imagine that's part of the excitement and probably the challenge for both of you in user experience, and obviously on the other side where you're working with the customers, and the full product development. So what are some of those challenges you're facing right now? I mean, also we're in the midst still of a pandemic. How has that changed? Because can you get on job sites? Can you really see people interacting? What does that look like for you now?
So over the last year and 9 months, it's been very difficult, honestly. The first few months were really difficult for our team to go out physically, see users, talk to them, because we have many different avenues of getting research. There's lots of different ways, but the way that we feel we get the highest quality is when we're actually in front of users. So we had to be very creative over the last few months of how can we fill this gap? It's since gotten better, but we had to figure out ways for this to work for us. So aside from using our standard communities or using market research, we started actually using social media to reach out to do one-on-one interviews with our customers, because we needed to have those longer form discussions, but we weren't able to get onto sites, to even go into offices and see people. So we were using that as one of our stopgaps, and we've since found that this is something we want to continuously implement even after this. But a really fun project that Sara and I have been working on, which has added many different hurdles throughout it, has been a global project, and managing a global development project in the midst of a pandemic, not being able to really get out and with a highly complex idea, physically talking to users has really gotten us to get very creative on how we're finding out.
And I think there's a lot of value in that too, of we had to get creative in how we're finding these people, how we're talking to them. But also, it's been interesting saying, hey, can you take a picture and show us your tools? And people love that. People love talking about, what they're doing and showing us what they're using. So that's been a tool of just asking, hey, can you take a quick video? Can you take a picture? Show us. So that's what, design thinking is all about, like being creative and coming up with creative ways to solve problems. So it was kind of fun to think about how we could overcome this hurdle. And I do think one positive that's come out of this is, we have been able to talk to people around the globe. That might not have happened before. We might not have been able to travel to England to speak to some users there that were fantastic, right? We heard all sorts of interesting things from them. We did have to, work a little bit of crazy hours, but, that's building those connections across the globe. We might not have done that before. And so that was something that I do think was really nice to be able to have a bigger market because we're connecting digitally.
Absolutely. And on the other side of it, the people that you're connecting with may not have been available, right? Because we're kind of globally in a position, where we've kind of leveled that part of the playing field for the most part. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. So you've decided to keep doing that. That's amazing. That's a good kind of positive outcome, like you said, Sara. And I'm kind of curious too, Sara, how did you get into this field? Because, you talk a little bit about empathy and I know just kind of reading about you, you're passionate about people and you're just what you went to school for. How did you kind of go into that line of work?
Well, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist for a long time. And then I realized I had to go to medical school, and there were some things that went along with that I don't really like, no. Human body is for somebody else. Yeah. But then I was at Michigan. I was actually working at the library, and somebody was like, hey, you should look into this program. I think it would be really great for you, because I was doing some online web design for them and those types of things. And so then I ended up at the School of Information and really fell in love with human computer interaction. And it's the perfect crossroads for me of psychology and helping people and technology. So, thinking about how can I make someone's day better? How can I make their lives better? And really getting to create things as well, and getting to create fun and creative products for people to use, and get to meet people like Mike and all of our users in England, and getting to understand, what their lives are like. My whole job is getting to understand other people's lives. And I love that. I love talking to people and figuring out how we can help them.
That's very cool. Yeah. And so, Mike, the two of you work together pretty regularly as far as I understand. And what does that look like? How does that relationship work? Is there, I'm thinking if I'm, outside of power tools, let's say, and I'm in another industry, but really looking at user experience, what makes sense? What's the best way to approach that?
Yeah. And that's where people from all over the business come to us. And that's the great thing about being in the management consulting group, is that we get to work with every part of Bosch. So there are days when I'm working on power tools. There's days when we're working with legal or electrification projects. We get to see and hear it all, which is fantastic. And people come to us and say, hey, here's our problem. And then we have a process that we go through. We do something called Question Zero, and it really helps us define what the North Star of a project is. And from there, we can say, you know what, you need to do research. We need to prototype. We need to ideate on a prototype. And then we give a list to those teams to say, hey, here's what we can do for you. And actually, an interesting part of the first project I was on with Mike was actually teaching. So it was something, it wasn't just UX doing the work. We also do coaching. So we go through and we work with teams and say, hey, we're actually going to work with you and teach you how to do user interviews. And then you can go off and do it yourself next time, or come out, we can help. And so there's all sorts of different options. And I think my favorite thing about that first project was, as time went on, a lot of people on the product team were like, hey, was that a leading question? Should I ask this question? And they got so into it when I can see that we're like delivering something that's going to create a better user experience. And, again and again, right? It's not just me doing it. Now I have 10 other people that are doing it. And that's how Bosch continues to engineer and create amazing things for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And Mike, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sara summed it up really well, but coming from, I guess, like the client now, right? Looking for that UX coaching, looking for that help on how are we designing what we want to go into a research phase with, or a prototyping phase with. For us, the really big thing is defining Question Zero and having UX designers coach us through not only what are we trying to solve, but more importantly, why are we trying to solve this problem? What value is it really bringing back to the users? And for us, the relationship that Sara and I had throughout this whole part was very much Sara coaching me throughout. How am I not only going to conduct research for the project that we were working on together, but taking those learnings and applying them to my job. My job is to go be the voice of the user back in. It's not just a singular project. I can take those learnings and the methodologies that we have put in place together that Sara had coached me on in every aspect for every project that we have, and get a higher quality of understanding of what our users are actually doing. So for us, being the requesters of help when it comes to UX, it's really taking the learning standpoint. We might be experts in our field or experts in certain areas, but getting the expertise and the coaching on how should we properly implement this only makes the information that we get out of it that much more valid and higher quality to give us a better result when that product comes to market, or when it moves to the next phase of development. It's really fun, honestly.
I can imagine. Do both of you does this kind of bleed into your personal life as you maybe go through and like interact with the product? I could imagine myself, if I am in that space so often, being like, well, the, user experience of this,
Yeah. And that's something. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. When it works well, when things are working well, it makes me really happy. But when I can find just one thing that clearly wasn't done for the user, it weighs on me, because all I think about is, did they test this? Did somebody put this in someone's hands and actually see how this was going to work out? Because that's what we do all day long. So right. It's hard for me to remove that, because I do find it interesting. I find it fun to see how can anything from a power tool to a packaging box get innovated out.
And I think one thing too, it's funny, not only do I notice things, other people notice things and are like, hey, can you look at this? What did they do wrong?
That's awesome.
Those types of things come up all the time. Or, my sister works for a different company and she said, hey, can you help me out for a few minutes? Which is great. I love it when people recognize the value of user testing. And understanding, are we creating something that could be better? And also, I think the other interesting piece of this is making sure that we're developing products that stand the test of time, right? We're not sacrificing quality we're not sacrificing good design to put something out there quick, making sure that there's a good balance of delivering, but also making sure that we're delivering something good to our end users. And that's something Lean UX is a really great book that helps describe that process of how we deliver a good balance, deliver quickly, but also have just the right amount of user experience design integrated into the product, and making sure, and you can see it sometimes. It's so obvious that they were like, hey, we're just going to put this out there now. We'll fix it later. And, sometimes that's not the best mentality.
Right. For sure. Have you had any, stories or examples of when you've maybe something hasn't worked, when you've tried to implement it, or, on the other side, where it's just been a really awesome success story, where you've really kind of gotten that satisfaction out of that?
We're in the midst of it right now. So we were working on a pretty complex solution for our users. We've understood the problem. We've done a lot of research on where these problems lie for our users, and we found a solution for it. And we find the solution being something that's really overarching and encompassing. And looking at the form and function after we've designed this product and how it's working and how it's operating, it's really exciting that it works. It's really exciting that it's doing exactly what, we've intended and what the research told us we needed. But looking at the physical product is like, oh boy, how do we actually make this something viable that can make it to the market? Because, clearly it's too big. Clearly it's too heavy. Clearly we need to do some industrial design work and now start the process over for the actual design of it, as opposed to what the product in and of itself is. So it's got its pros and cons to it. I've got another project very similarly that I've been very close to from the beginning. And the product itself looks great, works really well, but my own biases come into, is the performance meeting my standards? And I always have to remove myself from that and say, it's not my standards. It's got to meet the user standards. It's got to meet what they expect this tool to do out in the field. And where I felt let down in my own personal testing and in our test labs, actually getting out to the field and getting that feedback on what our users are actually seeing is completely different. So it's only helping reinforce that, I think Sara alluded to at the beginning, we don't use these all day long. Going to the user helps validate, helps us understand, and helps us find that true north so much better.
And on that too, it's, even if you don't create a perfect product the first time around, user-centered design is continuous. As long as that product lives and we are adding new things or changing new things, this process really never ends. Making sure that we're validating new features, or, hey, maybe there's something else that could be improved. And so it is a continuous cycle. And that's something that I think sometimes gets lost, that user experience is not a waterfall. We're going to do it up front and then never address it again. That's not the best option that we have. But I think also sometimes there's success and failure too. And that's why we prototype. Mike talked about that product. That's why we're creating prototypes, getting it out there and testing it, because it's a lot cheaper to fail with a prototype than it is to bring something to market and figure out that it doesn't work. Oh. And so that is the value of design too. Sometimes failure is actually some of the best outcomes that you can have, because now we have stopped something or been able to change something before we have invested lots of time and money into something.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
Creating that, the culture of build, measure, learn. So building something, testing, learning from it, and almost creating a safe place to fail is sometimes some of the best information that we can get as designers.
So that falls into actually my favorite business quote overall, which I'm going to paraphrase, but it's from Thomas Edison. And he said, I won't say that I've failed 1,000 times. I'll say that I learned 1,000 ways not to do something. Mm. And that iterative process and taking failure as a learning point is something that is so important, because is it really a failure then? Or did you just find something that didn't work? Did you learn something from it? Because I always take it as, if I learned from it, it wasn't a failure. I now have knowledge or something that I didn't have or possess before that I can improve upon and continue to improve upon. So I love the idea and methodology. Absolutely.
I mean, really, that applies to really anything in life, right? Like, I mean, it's how you look at it, is that perspective, and learning from what we do and what we don't do, what we shouldn't do. So I wanted to ask you both, what is a struggle or one of your biggest challenges right now, just today? What's one of the things that's just been like, I am struggling here? Nothing?
I can
let you go. No, I have one. I'll let him go first.
So right now, it really is still being able to physically go out, see our customers, and get their hands on our prototypes and our tools. And the reason for that is all the creative ways that we've found to work around what's been happening over the last year have worked really well. But I find it so much more impactful actually being there, actually seeing how these tools are operating on a site and how users are interacting with them on a more intimate level, and the side learnings that come along with it. That's probably been the biggest struggle for me, but it's also probably a large struggle because it's my favorite part of the job. I say the job, and to me, anytime I get the opportunity to be on site or to be with users, it doesn't feel like I'm working at all, because I'm really not working. I'm learning, and to me, I disassociate those. I see it as being able to improve on my craft, and it's exciting.
And along that line, I'll absolutely agree with Mike. One of the hardest things is not seeing someone in person, because we're not only listening to what they're saying, what are they doing? What are their body language? What is that telling us? Are they saying, oh, yeah, and crossing their arms and rolling their eyes? Like, that is just as important as, what they're actually saying. And so that has been difficult. And sometimes, we're very heavily reliant on technology now. And we actually saw this in the project I worked on with Mike. Sometimes we have users that struggle with that. And so trying to get everyone on the call and get cameras turned on, the level of knowledge of technology has to be there across everyone, right? So it's not just interviewing people, but also providing accurate instructions and making sure that we're getting all of the information that we need.
I can imagine there is just a variety of different learning gaps, but I could see that struggle for sure. So as we wrap up, I wanted to ask both of you if you have something, just the best piece of advice that you've ever gotten, or maybe that you give to someone else. So it could be personal or professional. Do you have something that comes to mind?
I think for me, it's remembering not to take it personally. And I think this is something in my personal life, but also from a user experience perspective. You're asking for feedback all the time, and someone might say, I don't like that. And taking that as in, okay, that's great. I have to go create something else or ideate on this. And sometimes it's hard when, if people, I think we fall in love with the things that we create. Just like putting words on a page, it's harder to take them away than it is to add to them. And so keeping in mind that focus of, don't take it personally. It's, they're critiquing the product and not me. And that's how we get to be better. And making sure that we're always open to that feedback, and that it's take it constructively.
Yeah, that's good.
Make sure that it's not taken personally.
I think mine fits into that same vein, actually. And it would be taking a beginner's mindset. When we're inside the walls of whatever building we're working in, we may be the experts or the functional expert of whatever. But when you're out with the user, when you're out with the person that is going to be affected by what you're trying to create, taking the beginner's mindset and taking the full, I'm just here to learn what your perspective is. It kind of falls into play with, don't take it personally. Use this as an opportunity to learn as much as you can, because you may think that something is so basic that you've completely understood it, but a user or someone who is intimate with the product regularly may take that basic piece of knowledge and completely blow it up for you. And that right there might be what the difference between iterating on a product and doing a lifecycle management or having a totally new innovation. So really going back to saying that I'm going to be at the baseline and I'm out here when I'm in the midst of field research as a beginner and taking everything as a learning, I think is the best piece of advice that I've gotten.
That's really good. I heard a story once of a man who had been a pilot for a while, like just, as a hobby. And he would every time, I don't know exactly how this works, but he would radio in as he was coming in to the tower or the landing, whatever that may be. And he would say, pilot in training every time. And he's been doing this for years because he didn't want the people to assume that he had it all under control. He wanted to make sure he had kind of that support. And I thought that was really interesting because I feel like when people do something for a long time, you tend to maybe, even inadvertently get a little bit of pride with that. You can miss things. You can be blinded by, like you said, Mike, kind of not putting yourself at that baseline to learn. And you can miss some of those opportunities. And so I love that. I love both of those do go together. I think they're really, really good advice. Well, thank you both for being here with us. We really appreciate your time. It was really fun. I learned something. I hope those who are listening, if you were driving or if you're not, take notes when you're not driving and, just go ahead and replay this for yourself and take those nuggets home. And thank you both for being here, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jessica.
Be sure to subscribe now so you don't miss an episode, and leave us a review and let us know what you think of this episode. Thanks for listening.